17 winters old and already condemned, frost bit the Dakota burial clearing as Arapaho elders retreated, leaving Anya bound within the shallow earth pit. Their shame was her tombstone. Above, the wind screamed through ancient pines. A hawk's cry echoed the desolation. Then, a shadow moved beyond the ridge, silent, watchful, who would defy the spirits, the elders, and the frozen ground to reach a hand into the grave. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. The last shovelful of earth, heavy and cold, struck Anya's chest like a final curse. It scattered, gritty particles catching in her lashes, tasting of iron and despair. She lay rigid within the shallow scrape in the frozen Dakota earth, wrists bound tightly with braided rawhide behind her back, ankles secured the same. Above her, the world was a narrow rectangle of bruised twilight sky, framed by the raw, dark edges of the pit. Frost, thick and crystalline, already feathered the exposed roots clawing at the pit's sides, glinting with cruel, fragile beauty in the fading light. The air she drew was knife-sharp, searing her lungs, each exhale a ghostly plume that hung briefly before dissolving into the encroaching dark. They had left her only moments ago. The muffled thud of retreating footsteps on the hard-packed snow, the low murmur of the purification chant carried away on a relentless wind whipping to the towering ponderosa pines that encircled this grim clearing. These were the sounds of her world ending. Shame. The word echoed louder than any chant within the hollow chamber of her chest. Not shame born of flesh, but of spirit. A broken vow, they said, a sacred promise whispered to the ancestors at her mother's deathbed, shattered by her refusal to wed the warrior chosen by the elders. Refusal born not of defiance, but a terrifying vision. Flames consuming the lodges, the screams of children. She had spoken the warning. They heard only disobedience, a girl daring to claim sight beyond her station, disrupting the fragile peace they clung to in this harsh winter of 1862. Her vision was deemed madness, or worse, a curse invited, and curses demanded isolation, demanded silence, demanded burial beneath the indifferent sky. Anya clenched her jaw, the muscles protesting against the cold and the effort of stillness. She would not give them the satisfaction of hearing her fear. Let the frost claim her skin, it would not claim her spirit. She focused on the rectangle of sky. A single, defiant star pierced the twilight gray. Look, it seemed to whisper. Look beyond the pit. She shifted minutely, the frozen earth scraping her thin buckskin dress, feeling the cold seep upwards from the unforgiving ground, a slow, inevitable claiming. The wind, channeled to the pines, moaned a low, continuous dirge, carrying the scent of snow and distant, untamed wilderness. Somewhere far off, a lone coyote yipped, a sound that echoed the desolation tightening around her heart. Time stretched, thin and brittle. The cold deepened, seeping past skin into bone. Her breath came faster, shallower, the plumes less substantial, the star above blurred. Was it her eyes watering, or the encroaching dark? Panic, cold and slick, tried to coil in her belly. No, breathe, look. She fixed her gaze on the star. It was still there, a pinprick of light in the vast, cold dark. A promise, however faint. 10 miles northwest, where the dense pine forest gave way to a wind-swept ridge overlooking a frozen, serpentine stream, a fire crackled. Not a large fire, but a fiercely guarded one, nestled within a ring of lichen-spotted granite boulders. Its light painted dancing shadows on the weathered buffalo hide stretched taut between two sturdy lodgepole pines, forming a lean-to shelter against the ridge face. The air here tasted cleaner, sharper, carrying the resinous tang of pine and metallic bite of impending snow. Kaelen Blackfox knelt by the fire, his hand steady as he turned a rabbit skewered on a green willow branch. The flames reflected in his dark, watchful eyes that missed little in the wilderness he called home. He was Cherokee, though his people were far to the south, ghosts in a land stolen by smoke and soldiers. Here, in the Dakota Territory's vastness, he was simply a man who walked alone, a hunter whose footprints vanished quickly on the wind-scoured ridges. His clothing was practical. Worn buckskin trousers, a thick wool shirt scavenged from a trading post years ago, and a heavy cloak crafted from the hide of a mountain lion he'd tracked for 3 days. His long black hair, streaked with a single, premature strand of silver near his temple, was pulled back tightly, secured with a simple leather thong. A recurved bough of polished Osage orange rested against a rock beside him, alongside a quiver of arrows fletched with hawk feathers. A tin kettle, blackened by countless fires, steamed gently at the fire's edge. The rabbit fat dripped, hissing onto the coals, sending up fragrant sparks. The rhythmic sound was usually a comfort, a small anchor in the solitude. Tonight, it couldn't drown the unease that had settled over him like a damp blanket since sunset. It wasn't the cold, though the wind knifing down from the north promised a bitter night. It was a feeling, a prickling at the nape of his neck, a sense of the land holding its breath. He'd learned long ago not to ignore such whispers. They had spoken the day the soldiers came to New Dakota, the day the smoke choked the sky and the screams tore his childhood apart. He'd been 12, hidden in a root cellar with his younger sister, Ilara. He'd held her small, trembling hand, promising they'd be safe. He remembered the exact sound of the trapdoor splintering above them, the harsh sunlight blinding him, the rough hands grabbing Ilara first, her terrified shriek cutting off abruptly. He'd fought a wild animal, biting, clawing. He'd been clubbed down, waking hours later alone amidst the smoldering ruins of his world. The soldiers, the settlers hungry for land, they'd taken everything. Taken Ilara. He'd never found her. That loss was a constant cold stone in his gut, colder than any Dakota wind. Survival since then had been a solitary path, etched with grief and a wary distance from all people, white or tribal. Trust was a luxury buried with his family. A sound sliced through the wind's moan, not the coyote, not the rustle of pine boughs. It was faint, strained, a human cry, choked and desperate, carried on a sudden, fierce gust from the southeast. It lasted only a heartbeat, then was gone, swallowed by the wilderness. Kaelen froze, the rabbit forgotten, his head snapped up, his gaze instantly scanning the dark tree-line beyond his ridge, towards a direction sound. Had he imagined it? The wind could play cruel tricks, mimicking voices, but the unease tightened its grip. That cry hadn't sounded like an animal in pain, nor a trapper's shout. It held a raw edge of terror, of utter desolation. It echoed the unvoiced scream that had lived in his own throat for 14 years. He stood, a fluid movement honed by years of tracking. The firelight cast his tall, lean frame in stark relief against the snow-dusted rocks. He listened, straining every sense. Only the wind answered, sighing through the pines like restless spirits. But the feeling persisted, a rawness in the night. The cry or the memory of it tugged at the cold stone of his grief. He saw Ilara's face in the flickering flames, not as she was, but as he imagined her now, lost, afraid. The settler who dragged her away had worn a coat of rough blue wool, smelled of sweat and cheap whiskey. The details were etched in acid on his soul. That cry, it wasn't Ilara. It couldn't be, but it was someone alone, someone terrified. His hunter's instincts warred with the ingrained caution that kept him alive. Investigating a cry in the dark, especially near tribal lands he skirted respectfully, was asking for arrows in the back. Yet, the image wouldn't leave him, the choked sound, the desolation in it. It resonated too deeply with the silence that had followed Ilara's scream. He banked the fire quickly, scattering the coals within the ring of stones, plunging the campsite into near darkness save for the dull ember glow. He slung his bow and quiver over his shoulder, checked the heavy skinning knife at his belt, and pulled his mountain lion cloak tight around him. With one last look toward the southeast, with a cry that seemed to originate from a low, pine-choked valley known as Whisper Hollow, he moved. He didn't run. He flowed, a shadow among the deeper shadows of the pines, his moccasins silent on the frozen ground, his senses hyper-alert, tracking the memory of a sound towards an unknown darkness. The world above Anya's grave had narrowed to a strip of charcoal black. The star was gone, swallowed by cloud or her own failing vision. The cold was no longer an external force. It was inside her, a core of ice expanding, slowing her blood, thickening her thoughts. Her breath came in ragged, shallow gasps, each one a struggle against the weight pressing down, the weight of earth, of judgment, of the endless, suffocating dark. She tried to move her fingers, bound behind her, but sensation was fading, replaced by a terrifying numbness creeping up her limbs. Fear, a great black bird, beat its wings against the cage of her ribs. This was it, the silence of the elders, the finality of the earth, her vision of fire. Had it been a true warning, or merely the madness they claimed? Had she died for a lie? A sob, dry and broken, scraped her throat. The shame they buried her for felt distant now, meaningless against the vast, crushing indifference of the frozen earth and the endless sky. Mother, the thought was a final, fading ember. The numbness spread, a welcome oblivion beckoning. Her eyelids fluttered, heavy as stones. To sleep, just to sleep? A sound, different, close. Not the wind, not the settling earth. A scrape, deliberate, rhythmic. Scritch thud, scritch thud. It came from above, near the edge of the pit. Anya's eyes flew open, wide with a terror that momentarily burned through the numbness. An animal? A scavenger drawn by the scent of dying warmth? She strained against her bonds, a futile panic movement that only drove the rough rawhide deeper into her skin. The scraping stopped. Silence, thick and listening. Then a low murmur, almost lost in the wind, but distinctly human. Not the guttural tones of her people. A lower timbre, rougher, speaking words she couldn't decipher. Hope, treacherous and sharp, lands through the ice in her chest, followed instantly by a crushing wave of dread. Who and why? Had the elders sent someone back? To ensure the deed was done? To mock her final moments? Scritch thud. The sound resumed, closer now, directly above her head. Clods of frozen earth and pebbles rained down onto her face. She flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, bracing for the blow, the final handful of dirt. Instead, the rhythmic digging intensified. Scrape, thud, scrape, thud. Faster now, purposeful. She dared open her eyes again, blinking against the falling grit. A shape blocked a strip of sky. Broad shoulders hunched, a dark silhouette against the slightly lighter blackness. The rhythmic sound was the bite of a tool, a knife, a digging stick, against the frozen ground. He was digging her out. Confusion warred with the dregs of hope. This wasn't an elder. The shape was wrong, the movements unfamiliar. Who defied the judgment? Who risked the wrath of the ancestors, the elders, for a girl branded cursed? The cold retreated a fraction, replaced by a trembling that started deep within her core and radiated outwards. Was it rescue or a different kind of death? The digging stopped abruptly. She heard a soft grunt of effort, the shifting of weight. Then a hand appeared, reaching down into the pit. It was a large hand, strong-looking, clad in fingerless leather gloves darkened by earth and frost. It hovered above her face, stark against the gloom. Look at me. The voice was low, gravelly, speaking the trade tongue with a heavy accent she didn't recognize. It wasn't a command, but an urgent request, cutting through the wind's whine. Anya's gaze, wide and terrified, locked on the hand, then traveled slowly up the arm to the face shadowed by the hood of a thick cloak. She saw the strong line of a jaw, tight with exertion, and the faint gleam of eyes reflecting the ambient starlight filtered through the clouds, eyes that held not judgment, but fierce, almost desperate intensity. Eyes that looked at her, not through her. Take it! The voice urged, softer now, the hand stretching closer, palm open. Now, before the cold takes your strength. Every instinct screamed caution. Trust had led only to betrayal, to this grave. But the alternative was the welcoming numbness, the final dark. The trembling intensified. Slowly, agonizingly, she managed to twist her bound hand slightly, bringing her fingers, numb and clumsy, towards the offered hand. Her movement was feeble, hampered by the rawhide and the cold seizing her joints. Her fingertips brushed the rough leather of his palm. A spark, not of warmth, but connection, jolted through her. It was the first human touch not meant to bind or punish, and she couldn't remember how long. His fingers closed gently but firmly around hers. His grip was astonishingly warm, radiating a heat that seemed to sear through her frozen skin. "Hold," he said, the single word laden with a quiet command born of necessity. With a powerful, steady pull that sent fresh showers of earth cascading down, he began to draw her upwards, out of the shallow embrace of her frozen tomb. Her body felt leaden, uncooperative, scraping against the rough sides of the pit. She cried out, a soft gasp of pain as her bound arms protested the angle. He adjusted his grip, his other hand finding purchase under her shoulder, lifting with surprising care despite the urgency. The weight of the earth fell away. The cold wind struck her exposed face like a physical blow, but it was the wind of the living world. She was half in, half out of the grave, her torso resting on the frozen ground beside the pit, her legs still dangling within the earth. She sucked in a great, shuddering breath of the frigid air, coughing violently. Her rescuer knelt beside her, his breath pluming white in the darkness, his gaze scanning her face, then darting toward the dark tree-line where her people had vanished. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice tight, focused. He was already reaching for the knife at his belt, its blade catching a sliver of moonlight. The bonds. A sudden, sharp sound cracked through the night, echoing off the distant rock faces. Not the wind, not an animal, a horse's whinny. Close, too close, followed by the distinct, metallic jingle of a bridle. Someone was coming. Someone was here. Anya's breath hitched, her eyes flying wide with renewed terror, locking onto the stranger's face. The fragile spark of hope flickered, threatened by the chilling certainty of pursuit. The hand that held hers tightened almost imperceptibly, a silent anchor in the sudden, perilous storm. The knife paused in his grip, his gaze snapping towards the sound, every line of his body coiling with the readiness of a wolf sensing the hunt. The grave yawned beside them, a dark maw, but the danger now rode towards them on swift, unforgiving hooves. The metallic jingle, sharp and alien in the wind-whipped silence of the burial clearing, hung in the frigid air like a death knell. Anya's hand, still clasped in Kaelen's warm, earth-stained grip, went rigid. Her breath, still ragged from being hauled from the grave, caught in her throat. The fragile warmth kindled by his touch was instantly doused by a wave of icy terror. They were back, the elders, or warriors sent to finish what the earth had not. The shallow pit yawned beside them, a dark maw offering only a return to oblivion. Kaelen didn't hesitate. His reaction was pure instinct, honed by years of evasion and survival. In one fluid motion, his knife flashed, not toward the sound, but toward the rawhide binding Anya's wrist behind her back. The sharp blade sliced through the tough cord with surprising ease. He didn't pause to free her ankles. Up! The command was a low, urgent rasp, cutting through her paralysis. His grip shifted from her hand to her upper arm, hauling her fully onto the frozen ground beside the grave. Her legs, numb and clumsy from cold and the bonds, buckled. She stumbled, a cry of pain stifled behind clenched teeth as feelings surged back into her limbs in agonizing pins and needles. Move! Kaelen urged again, his voice tight. He pulled her towards the densest wall of ponderosa pines bordering the clearing, away from the direction of the horse sounds. He moved with a silent, predatory grace of a cougar, but Anya felt like a newborn fawn, her legs refusing to obey, the world tilting. The memory of the pit's crushing darkness wore with the immediate terror of capture. Behind them, the jingle sounded again, closer now, accompanied by the soft, rhythmic thud of hooves on frozen earth. Kaelen half-dragged, half-supported her into the deeper shadows beneath the ancient pines. The wind's howl lessened slightly, muffled by the thick canopy, but the air was colder, damper, smelling of decaying needles and frost. Moonlight filtered through high, scudding clouds cast shifting, distorted patterns on the snow-dusted forest floor. Kaelen pulled her down behind a massive, snow-cushioned root system of fallen giant pine. "Quiet," he breathed, the word barely audible. He pressed a finger to his lips, his eyes, dark pools of intensity in the gloom, fixed not on her, but on the edge of the clearing they'd just fled. Anya huddled against the rough, icy bark, her freed hands instinctively rubbing her chafed wrists. She tried to still her frantic breathing, to make herself small and silent against the colossal trunk. The cold seeped through her thin buckskin dress anew, but was a secondary sensation, drowned by the pounding of her heart against her ribs, so loud she feared it would betray them. She strained her ears. The hoofbeat stopped just beyond the tree-lean. Silence, thick and listening, descended, then a low murmur of voices. 2, perhaps 3 men. The cadence was unmistakably Arapaho, but the words were swallowed by the wind and distance. Anya shivered violently, not just from cold. She recognized the harsh timbre of one voice. Tall Bull, the elder most vehement in his condemnation, the one whose hands had been the first to throw the shovelful of earth onto her chest. His presence solidified the nightmare. Kaelen remained utterly still beside her, a statue carved from shadow and tension. He hadn't drawn his bow, but his hand rested near the skinning knife at his belt, his body coiled like a spring. Anya saw his profile etched against the dim light. The strong jaw clenched, the eyes narrowed, scanning the darkness with unnerving focus. He wasn't just hiding. He was assessing, calculating angles of threat and escape routes through the labyrinth of trees. A sharper command cut through the murmur. Boots crunched on frozen snow, moving cautiously toward the burial site. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her forehead against the cold wood. She could picture them standing at the pit's edge, seeing the disturbed earth, the empty scrape. Her absence wouldn't be seen as escape, but as defiance of further curse unleashed. The consequences for her, and now, for the man who had pulled her from the earth, were unthinkable. Kaelen's hand closed lightly over her forearm. She flinched, eyes snapping open. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was locked on the approaching figures, now dimly visible through the skeletal underbrush, dark shapes moving towards the violated grave. He gave her arm a slight, insistent tug, then nodded deeper into the forest, away from the clearing and the men. His message was clear. Now, while they're distracted, he rose soundlessly, keeping low, using the massive trunk as cover. Anya forced her trembling legs to push her up. Every muscle protested, stiff and aching from the cold and the trauma. She stumbled again, catching herself on a snow-laden branch that showered icy crystals down with a soft whump. The sound, though slight, seemed deafening in the tense silence. Kaelen froze, his head snapping back towards the clearing. Anya held her breath, terror icing her veins. Had they heard? Seconds stretched, agonizing. The voices near the grave continued, raised now in argument or alarm. No shout of discovery came. Kaelen met her eyes briefly, a flicker of shared understanding passing between them. The razor's edge they walked. He gestured again more urgently, and began to move, not running, but gliding through the trees with incredible stealth, choosing paths where the snow was thinnest, avoiding brittle undergrowth. Anya followed, mimicking his crouch, placing her feet with desperate care, though her movements felt clumsy and loud compared to his ghostly passage. The forest floor was a treacherous mosaic of snow patches, frozen moss, and fallen branches. Each step was a potential betrayal. They moved parallel to a frozen stream, its surface a dull, gray ribbon in the uncertain light, winding through pines. Kaelen paused frequently, melting into shadow of a trunk or a boulder, listening intently, his senses seemingly extending into the very fabric of the night. Anya huddled behind him during these pauses, felt the cold intensifying, biting through her dress. The numbness was returning, creeping up from her feet, a dangerous lassitude that threatened to overwhelm the adrenaline. She focused on Kaelen's broad back, the shape of his bow, the worn leather of his mountain lion cloak. Tangible anchors in a world turned hostile and surreal. After what felt like an eternity of silent flight, Kaelen veered sharply away from the stream, leading them up a steep, rocky incline littered with scree. The climb was brutal on Anya's weakened state. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one a plume of white agony in the cold air. She slipped on loose stones, scraping her palms raw. Kaelen, ahead, turned and reached back without a word, his strong hand gripping hers firmly, pulling her up over a particularly treacherous ledge. His touch, practical and impersonal, was nonetheless a lifeline. At the top, the wind hit them with renewed force, howling across a windswept ridge dotted with stunted, wind-sculpted pines. Below, the forest they traversed lay like a dark, rumpled blanket. Kaelen pulled her down behind a cluster of granite boulders, their surfaces scoured clean of snow by the relentless gale. "Rest," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the wind. He scanned the ridge and the forest below with predatory intensity. Shortly, Anya collapsed against the cold stone, drawing her knees up, wrapping her arms around herself in a futile attempt to trap warmth. She was shivering uncontrollably now, her teeth chattering. The exertion to climb had burned to the last of her adrenaline, leaving her hollow and trembling. She stared out at the vast, moon-washed wilderness, the endless sea of pines, the distant, snow-capped peaks like teeth against a starless sky. It was beautiful, in a way that was utterly indifferent, utterly terrifying. This was the world that had buried her alive. This was the world where she was hunted. Kaelen knelt beside her, shrugging off his heavy mountain lion cloak. Before she could protest, he draped it around her shoulders. The residual warmth trapped in the thick fur was like stepping into sunlight after an ice storm. It carried a scent, wood smoke, pine resin, cold earth, and something else, something uniquely him. The sudden enveloping heat was almost painful, but profoundly welcome. She pulled the cloak tight, burying her face in the fur for a moment, inhaling the unfamiliar, comforting smell. He watched her for a heartbeat, his expression unreadable in the gloom, then turned his attention to the ridge path they'd just climbed. He took a small pouch from the hide satchel slung across his chest. Inside were flakes of charred cloth and a piece of flint. With swift, practiced movements, he scraped the flint against the knife blade he'd used to free her, sending bright sparks cascading onto the charred cloth nestled in a small depression sheltered from the wind by the rocks. A tiny wisp of smoke curled upwards. He bent low, shielding it with his body, blowing gently. A minute flame flickered to life, hungry and orange. He fed it carefully with dry moss and the tiniest twigs he could find nearby, building a fire no larger than his cupped hands. Its heat was minuscule against the vast cold of the ridge, but its light, contained and secretive, felt like a tiny act of defiance against the darkness. He held his hands over the flames, then gestured for Anya to do the same. She shuffled closer, extending her numb, scraped hands toward the precious warmth. The firelight danced in her dark eyes, reflecting the lingering fear, the exhaustion, but also a dawning, fragile gratitude. Kaelen watched the flames, his face etched with a deep weariness that went beyond physical fatigue. "They will track," he said quietly, his gravelly voice almost lost in the wind. He didn't look at her. Snow holds stories. Even wind-scoured ridges whisper. Anya nodded, understanding the grim reality. Her people were skilled hunters. Tall Bull would not let this insult stand. "Why?" The word escaped her, a raw whisper. She looked at him, truly looked at him in the flickering firelight. The strong planes of his face, the premature silver streaks dark against his dark hair, the deep shadows under his watchful eyes. "Why did you—" She couldn't finish. "Dig me out? Risk yourself for a cursed stranger?" He met her gaze then, his own shadow with memories that seemed to stretch back into a private darkness. The small fire crackled, casting fleeting shadows. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead, his voice dropped lower, rougher. I heard a cry, in the wind, like, he hesitated, the words thick, like someone lost. His gaze drifted past her, towards a vast, indifferent night, someone alone. He fell silent, the unspoken weight of his own loss. The sister taken, the world shattered, hanging heavy in the air between them. It wasn't an explanation, but a shared resonance in the frequency of despair. Anya understood. The desolation in her cry had echoed the desolation in his own soul. It was a connection forged in shared darkness, not logic. She pulled the cloak tighter. "Anya," she offered softly, her voice still rough from cold and disuse. "My name is Anya." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Kaelen." He poked at the tiny fire with a twig, sending up a brief shower of sparks that vanished instantly into the wind. "Your feet," he said, his tone shifting back to practicality. "The cold bites deep." He gestured towards her moccasins, damp and worn. Anya looked down. She hadn't noticed the sharp ache growing in her toes until now. The numbness was giving way to a deep, throbbing pain. Frostbite. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her. Death by freezing was slow, agonizing. She tugged off the stiff moccasins with trembling fingers. Her feet were pale, almost waxy, the skin tight and painfully cold. Blisters from the bonds and the flight rubbed raw against the leather. Kaelen rummaged in his satchel again, pulling out a small, smooth stone jar sealed with wax. Inside was a pungent, earthy-smelling salve, dark as forest loam. Without ceremony, but with surprising gentleness, he scooped a small amount onto his fingers. "This will sting, then warm." He gestured for her feet. Anya hesitated for only a second. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, but survival demanded it. She extended a foot towards a meager firelight. His touch was firm, impersonal, yet careful as he applied the salve to the worst of the blisters and the icy skin. He was right. It stung fiercely, a sharp, herbal bite that made her gasp. But almost immediately, a deep, penetrating warmth began to spread, driving back the numbness with insistent heat. It was a small mercy, profoundly felt. As he tended to her other foot, Anya closed her eyes, focusing on the spreading warmth, the crackle of the tiny fire, the solid presence of the man beside her. The terror of the pit, the panic of the flight, receded slightly, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a flicker of something else. Not hope, perhaps, but cessation of utter aloneness. She found herself murmuring, almost unconsciously, a soft, rhythmic chant her grandmother had taught her, a prayer for strength and warmth, a plea to the spirits of the earth and sky for protection on a perilous journey. The words were Arapaho, ancient and flowing, a fragile thread of her identity woven into wind. Kaelen paused in his ministrations, listening. He didn't understand the words, but the cadence, the quiet intensity, resonated in the cold air. It was a sound of resilience, a refusal to be silenced. He finished applying the salve, his movements slower now, more deliberate. Suddenly, his head snapped up. He wasn't looking at her or at her feet, but out across the ridge, towards the distant treeline far below. His body went rigid, every sense straining. Anya's chant died on her lips. She followed his gaze, her heart hammering anew. What had he seen, heard? For a long moment, there was only the howl of the wind. Then Kaelen pointed, a single, sharp gesture. Far below, near the base of the ridge where the pines began again, a tiny, flickering point of orange light winked into existence against a vast darkness. It was small, perhaps a campfire, but its position was unmistakable. It lay directly along the path they had taken from the burial clearing, nestled near the frozen stream they'd followed. Pursuit. They hadn't just tracked them to the ridge. They were setting camp, blocking the easiest ascent. Waiting. Hunting. Kaelen's hand closed tightly around the hilt of his skinning knife where it lay beside him. The tiny fire at their feet suddenly seemed pathetically inadequate, its warmth a cruel illusion against the vast, cold wilderness and the pinpoint of hostile light far below. The fragile sanctuary of the ridge top vanished. They were exposed, seen. The hunters had found their trail, and now they signaled their presence, a deliberate, chilling reminder. We are here. We are coming. The vast Dakota night, which had moments ago felt merely indifferent, now pressed in with the weight of a closing trap. Anya's newly warmed feet felt suddenly, terrifyingly, cold again. The campfire's distant glow was a malevolent star, anchoring them to the ridge's exposed spine. Kaelen's hand, still gripping the skinning knife hilt, tightened until the knuckles shone pale in the moonlight. He didn't curse, didn't flinch. His stillness was the stillness of a predator assessing the sudden flare of a hunter's lantern. Anya felt the fragile warmth of the salve on her feet turn to ice again. The mountain lion cloak, moments ago a sanctuary, now felt like a target. Tall Bull wasn't just tracking. He was signaling his intent, his patience. He knew they were here. Time's gone, Kaelen murmured, the words low and final. With swift, economical movements, he scattered the tiny, precious fire beneath his boot heel, grinding the embers into the frozen earth until only a wisp of acrid smoke remained. The ridge plunged into deeper darkness, the wind's howl rushing in to fill the void. He scooped up the cold stone jar of salve, stowed in his hide satchel, and stood, his gaze sweeping the moon-washed expanse below and the treacherous slopes above. We crossed the high pass. Now! He pointed toward the jagged notch in the ridgeline, a place where the wind screamed loudest and the snow lay in treacherous, sculpted drifts. It was a path of last resort, brutal and exposed. Anya forced her stiff legs to obey, shrugging deeper into cloak. The descent from the ridge was a nightmare of sliding scree and wind-blasted rock. Kaelen moved ahead, testing each foothold, turning back to guide her hand to secure grips on frost-slick boulders. His touch was impersonal, focused, yet each point of contact was a lifeline in the vertiginous dark. Below, the orange-eyed pursuers fire-watched, unwavering. Anya's breath burned in her lungs, her muscles screaming from the earlier flight and the cold's relentless drain. She focused on Kaelen's silhouette, the shape of his bow against the star-flecked sky, the rhythmic rasp of his breathing. One step, then another. The rhythm became a silent chant, pushing back the terror. They reached the base of the cliff face where the ridge met a narrow, ice-choked valley. A frozen stream, wider here, snaked through it hard, its surface a chaotic mosaic of wind-scoured ice and snowdrifts. The relative shelter of the valley floor was an illusion. The wind funneled through it with knifing force, carrying stinging particles of ice. Kaelen paused at the valley's entrance, crouching low behind a tumble of glacier-smooth boulders. His eyes scanned the open expanse of the frozen stream, then the dense wall of black spruce crowding its banks. Tracks show clear on ice, he stated, his voice barely carrying over the wind. We walk the edge. In shadow, he gestured toward the deep gloom beneath the overhanging spruce boughs, heavy with accumulated snow. He moved first, a shadow dissolving into deeper shadow. Anya followed, stepping where he stepped, her moccasins sinking into the softer snow beneath the trees, leaving deeper impressions than his. Guilt pricked her. She was a burden, her passage a beacon for their hunters. Kaelen seemed to sense her thoughts. He stopped abruptly, turning back. Without a word, he pulled a wide, flat piece of bark from a fallen spruce. Kneeling, he began to sweep it methodically across their footprints, starting several yards back, dragging snow and forest debris to blur their trail. It was painstaking work, done in near total darkness, his movements precise. Anya watched, shivering, the cold seeping to the soles of her newly treated feet despite the salve. She remembered her mother, years ago, showing her how to brush away tracks when gathering sacred herbs, leaving no sign for curious eyes. The memory, sharp and unexpected, brought a pang of grief so intense it momentarily eclipsed the cold. Mother would weep to see me now, not condemned, perhaps, but hunted like a wounded doe. Here, Kaelen's low voice cut through her thoughts. He held out the bark. Drag it backwards. Light touch. Cover my steps too. He gestured to the path he'd just obscured. Anya hesitated, then took the rough bark. Her hands, still stiff, fumbled at first. She mimicked his motion, pulling the bark gently backwards over the snow, scattering pine needles and disturbed snow to mask the precise outline of his boots. It felt like an act of defiance, however small, against the hunters. Kaelen watched for a moment, his gaze unreadable, then nodded curtly. Good. He took the bark back, finishing the job with swift efficiency. That single word of approval, spoken without warmth but with acknowledgement, kindled a fragile ember worth within her chilled core. They pressed on, staying deep within the tree line, the frozen stream a glistening ribbon to their left. The world narrowed to the crunch of snow underfoot, the sigh of wind in the spruce, the frantic beat of her own heart. Kaelen moved with relentless vigilance, pausing often to listen, his head cocked, his entire being attuned to the wilderness. During one such pause, deep within the spruce cathedral, he stiffened. His hand shot out, pressing Anya flat against the rough trunk of an ancient tree. He pointed, not far ahead, just beyond the edge of their shadowed path. Moonlight glinted on something unnatural amidst the snow-draped undergrowth. A broken arrow shaft, painted with faded ochre stripes, lay snapped across a fallen log. Near its tip, tied with thin strip of rawhide, fluttered a small, stiff feather. Not hawk or eagle, but the barred feather of an owl. Anya's breath caught. It was a marker, a Wasaka marker, a warning or a sign for others. Tall Bull's warriors were not just following. They were scouting ahead, marking the way. The owl feather symbolized watchfulness in the dark, a silent hunter. The message was clear, we see you. Kaelen's jaw tightened. He didn't touch the arrow. To disturb it would be to confirm they'd seen it. He simply melted back deeper into the trees, pulling Anya with him, altering their course away from the stream, angling steeply uphill into thicker, more chaotic terrain where granite outcrops pierced the forest like broken teeth. The going became slower, more arduous. Anya's lungs burned. The salve's warmth was fading against the deepening cold and the exertion. She stumbled, catching herself on a snow-laden branch. A soft cry escaped her lips. Kaelen was instantly beside her, his grip firm on her arm. Hurt! The question was clipped, practical. Cold, she managed, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. Tired. Shame flooded her at the admission. She was failing him. He studied her face in the gloom, seeing the exhaustion etched there, the faint blue tinge to her lips. The ridgetop, the flight, the cold, it was taking its toll. His gaze flickered, not with annoyance, but with a calculation that seemed to weigh the wilderness, the pursuers, and her fragility. He looked around, his eyes scanning the jumble of boulders and dense spruce. Shelter, he declared, briefly. He led her toward the tumble of massive granite slabs, their bases buried in deep snowdrifts. At their junction, almost invisible unless you knew to look, was a dark slit, barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways. Kaelen brushed away the snow blocking its lower half. Inside, he ordered, gesturing, "Crawl." Anya hesitated, peering into the utter blackness. It looked like the mouth of the grave. Panic fluttered in her chest. Kaelen's hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Safe. For now. Deep earth holds warmth. His voice held no room for argument, only the certainty of experience. Drawing a shaky breath, Anya dropped her hands and knees and crawled into the narrow opening. The rocks scraped against a mountain lion cloak. The passage was short, opening abruptly into a small, domed chamber, perhaps carved by some ancient water flow. It was utterly dark, but the air was still and noticeably less frigid than outside, carrying the mineral scent of damp stone. She collapsed onto the sandy floor, pulling the cloak tight, trembling violently. Kaelen squeezed in behind her, filling the small space with his presence. the scent of wood smoke and cold pine resin momentarily overpowering the cave's dampness. He blocked the entrance with a large, flat stone he'd levered from outside, plunging them into complete, suffocating darkness. Anya's breath hitched. The weight of the earth, the confinement, it was too much like the pit. She pressed her back against the cold rock wall, trying to control her rising panic. Flint scraped. Sparks flared, brief and blinding in the absolute dark, illuminating Kaelen's concentrated face for a split second. He nursed a tiny pile of bone-dry moss and the finest twigs he must have gathered outside. A minute flame bloomed, fragile and precious. He shielded it with his hands, feeding it carefully with slivers of wood from his satchel. Soon, a small, contained fire, no larger than a man's palm, flickered in a shallow depression in the sandy floor. Its light was feeble, barely pushing back the pressing darkness of the cave, but its warmth was a palpable force, radiating outwards in confined space. The trembling in Anya's limbs began to subside, replaced by a profound exhaustion that threatened to pull her under. Kaelen sat back, his shoulders touching the opposite wall of the small chamber. The firelight danced in his dark eyes, reflecting not just the flames, but a deep, weary sorrow. He pulled a small, worn object from the pouch at his belt. It was a carving, smooth by years of handling. A tiny bird, wings folded, crafted from pale bone. He didn't offer it, just held it in his palm, staring at it as the firelight caressed its simple lines. Ilara, he said, the name a rough whisper that seemed torn from him by the cave's intimacy. He didn't look at Anya. My sister, she carved this before. He fell silent, the unspoken before the soldiers came hanging heavy in the air. He turned the carving over in his fingers. She loved birds, said they carried wishes to the sky. His thumb traced the folded wings. The grief in his voice was a raw, living thing, 14 winters old but undimmed. He had risked everything for a cry in the dark, because he had once failed to answer one. The bone bird was his burden and his vow. Anya watched him, the fierce protector momentarily stripped bare by memory. She understood the weight of loss, the silence where a voice should be. Her own mother's face surfaced in her mind, gentle hands teaching her the properties of healing plants, the soft lilt of her voice, singing the morning greeting to the sun. Gone to the coughing sickness 2 winters past. Anya had been alone ever since, until her vision had made her an outcast. She found her own voice, rough but clear. My mother, she knew the old songs, the healing songs. She hesitated, then softly began to hum the melody her mother used when preparing poultices, a simple, repetitive tune that spoke of Earth's gifts and gentle strength. It wasn't a chant for protection, but a song for mending, for warmth. She offered it into the small space, a fragile counterpoint to his grief. Kaelen didn't move, but his gaze lifted from the bone bird to her face. The firelight softened the harsh lines of his features. He didn't speak, but something shifted in the air between them. A shared recognition of wounds carried, of absences that shaped their solitary paths. He gave a single, slow nod, a silent acknowledgement of her offering. Then, practicality reasserted itself. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a strip of dried venison. He broke it in 2, offering her half. Eat, rest while you can. They ate in silence, the meager fire crackling. The cave a tiny island of fragile warmth and tentative understanding in a vast, frozen sea of danger. Anya leaned her head back against the cool stone, the exhaustion pulling at her eyelids. The mountain lion cloak, the fire's gentle heat, the solid presence of Kaelen across the small space, the shared fragments of their shattered pasts. It wove a fragile sense of safety, however illusory. For a few stolen moments, the terror receded. She watched the firelight play on the bone bird, still held loosely in Kaelen's hand, a bird grounded, yet holding the memory of flight. Kaelen suddenly tensed. His head snapped towards the cave entrance, the bone bird vanishing back into his pouch. He held up a hand, silencing her unasked question. His eyes were fixed on the rough stone, blocking the entrance. Anya held her breath, straining to hear over the muffled howl of the wind outside and the soft crackle of their fire. Then she heard it too, faint, muffled by stone and snow, but unmistakable. The crunch of a boot on frozen ground. Close, dangerously close, right outside the tumble of boulders hiding their shelter. A low, guttural voice, speaking Arapaho, filtered to the rock. Sign ends here, near these stones. Check the drifts. Tall Bull's voice. He was here, at the threshold. The hunters had found their sanctuary. The fragile warmth bled from the cave, replaced by the ice-cold certainty of discovery. Kaelen's hand closed slowly around the hilt of his skinning knife, his knuckles white, his gaze locked with Anya's across the dying firelight, wide with shared, silent terror. The scrape of stone against stone sounded just beyond their blocked entrance. Someone was moving the rocks, searching. The scrape of stone against stone, mere inches beyond the rock plugging their sanctuary, echoed like thunder in the cave's suffocating silence. Tall Bull's guttural command, check the drifts, hung in the damp, fire-warmed air, a death sentence whispered through granite. Kaelen's knuckles white around his skinning knife hilt were the only movement in the frozen tableau. His gaze, locked with Anya's across the tiny, flickering fire, held no panic, only a fierce, calculating intensity. The fragile warmth, the shared songs, the bone bird secret, all shriveled in the face of imminent discovery. Anya pressed herself harder against the cold rock wall, the mountain-lined cloak suddenly stifling. The cave walls seemed to close in, becoming the earthen tomb once more. She squeezed her eyes shut, not in surrender, but in a desperate, silent plea to the spirits her people believed she defiled. Not back, not the darkness, not for him. Her rescuer, burdened by his own ghosts, didn't deserve her fate. Kaelen moved, not toward the entrance, but deeper into the small chamber. With swift, silent urgency, he scooped sandy earth onto precious fire, smothering its light and warmth in seconds, plunging him into utter, suffocating blackness. The sudden loss was a physical blow. Anya bit back a whimper. In the absolute dark, the sounds outside amplified. The crunch of boots circling the boulder tumble, the low murmur of other voices joining Tall Bull's, the restless snore of a horse tethered nearby. Then, a different sound, a heavy thud against the stone blocking their entrance. Then another. Someone was testing its weight, trying to shift it. Kaelen's hand found Anya's arm in the dark, his grip iron-strong. He pulled her sideways, away from the entrance wall, deeper into the cave's narrow recess. His lips brushed her ear, his breath a warm ghost against her icy skin. Back wall. Crouch low. When it moves, move. Follow my shadow. Fast. Quiet. The words were barely audible, each one loaded with the gravity of their peril. Another heavy thud vibrated through the rock. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. The stone plug shifted minutely, grinding. A sliver of frigid, gray pre-dawn light pierced the darkness, illuminating swirling motes of dust. Anya's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the slow, inevitable grating of stone. She crouched, muscles coiled, every sense screaming. Kaelen was a denser shadow beside her, pressed flat against the back wall, his knife held low and ready. The bone bird, she knew, was tucked away, a talisman against oblivion. With a final, grating heave, the stone blocking the entrance was shoved aside, tumbling into the snowdrift beyond. Silhouetted against the weak dawn light, flooding the valley stood Tall Bull. His broad frame filled a narrow opening, his face etched with grim determination, his eyes scanning the dark interior, still adjusting from the outside gloom. Behind him, Anya glimpsed the shadowy forms of two younger warriors, spears held ready. Girl, Tall Bull's voice boomed into the cave, bouncing off the stone walls. You defy the earth's judgment. You bring greater shame. Come out, face the council's wrath. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Tall Bull took a step forward, bending to peer inside. Kaelen struck, not with the knife, but with his body. He launched himself sideways, not at Tall Bull, but past him, a silent blur exploding from the deeper darkness. He crashed into the two warriors flanking the entrance. It was pure, controlled chaos. An elbow slammed into one man's throat. A boot swept the legs of the other. A choked gasp. A startled cry. The clatter of a falling spear. Anya didn't hesitate. The instant Kaelen moved, she was moving too, a smaller shadow darting low beneath Tall Bull's outstretched arm as he whirled in surprise at the eruption behind him. She burst out into the shocking cold of the dawn, stumbling on the uneven ground, the mountain lion cloak flapping. The scene was chaos. Kaelen was already disengaging from the tangle of warriors, one clutching his throat, the other scrambling for his spear. Tall Bull, roaring in fury, spun back toward the cave exit, his hand reaching for the stone-headed war club at his belt. Run! Kaelen's command ripped through the cold air, not aimed at her, but fierce directive as he ducked a wild swing from the recovering warrior. He didn't look back, trusting her to obey. He feinted left, then darted right, snatching up one of the fallen spears as he moved, not to fight, but to hinder. He jammed the spear shaft into the legs of the warrior lunging for him, sending the man sprawling into the snowdrift. It bought seconds. Anya ran, not blindly, but toward the jumble of massive boulders further up the slope, away from the frozen stream valley below. Her feet, still aching but warm by the salve and adrenaline, found purchase on the snow-scattered rock. The cold air seared her lungs, but she pushed harder, driven by the primal terror of recapture. Behind her, Tall Bull's enraged bellow echoed, followed by the sharp crack of wood. Kaelen blocking the war club's descent with the spear shaft, splintering it. She risked a glance back. Kaelen was backing away, keeping the boulders between him and Tall Bull, who advanced like an enraged bear, his face contorted. The other warriors were regaining their feet, shaking off the snow. Anya scrambled over a lichen-covered boulder, sliding down the other side into a narrow defile choked with snow and thorny brush. Kaelen appeared moments later, vaulting the same rock, landing lightly beside her, his breath plumed white, his eyes scanning their immediate surroundings and then the slope above. Up! He gasped, pointing toward a steep, snow-filled gully leading to a higher, wind-swept plateau. No tracks. Wind scours it clean. He didn't wait, starting the arduous climb, kicking steps into the deep, unstable snow. Anya followed, clawing at the frozen earth and exposed roots for purchase. The sound of pursuit were close now. Angry shouts, the crunch of boots on the scree below the boulders. Tall Bull wouldn't be delayed for long. The gully was steep, the snow treacherously deep in places, threatening to swallow them whole. Halfway up, Anya's foot plunged through a hidden crust into icy water beneath. She cried out, the shock of cold momentarily paralyzing. Kaelen was instantly there, hauling her up, his face grim. Keep moving. Cold kills faster than them. They reached the plateau as the weak winter sun finally breached the distant peaks, casting long, distorted shadows. It was a desolate expanse, scoured by relentless winds, the snow hard-packed and rippled like a frozen sea. Nothing grew taller than stunted, gnarled juniper bushes, whipped into submission. The wind screamed here, carrying stinging ice crystals that bit at exposed skin. Kaelen didn't pause. He struck out across the open ground, angling toward the distant line of dark cliffs that rose like a broken fortress wall. The river gorge, he shouted over the wind. Cuts deep, cross there, confuse the trail. The exposure was terrifying. Anya felt utterly visible, a dark speck on a vast, white sheet. She kept glancing back, expecting to see Tall Bull and his warriors cresting the ridge. Not yet, but they would. The wind erased their footprints almost as soon as they were made, but it couldn't hide their silhouettes against the skyline for long. They reached the edge of the gorge as the sun climbed higher, revealing the true scale of the obstacle. Below them, perhaps 100 feet down, the frozen river snaked through a narrow canyon, its surface a chaotic jumble of pressure ridges, snowdrifts, and treacherous blue-black ice. The cliffs on either side were sheer and ice-glazed. The only possible crossing point seemed to be a narrow, snow bridge spanning the gorge where the walls pinched closest, perhaps 20 paces across. It looked fragile, wind-sculpted, a ribbon of white spanning the void. Kaelen studied it, then scanned the opposite rim. "No choice," he stated, his voice flat. "Wind covers tracks faster down there. They'll expect us to skirt it." He turned to Anya, his eyes searching hers. The fierce protector was still there, but beneath it, she saw the echo of the man who'd held the bone bird, the weight of responsibility, the fear of failing again. "Step where I step. Light. Fast. Do not stop." He started across. The snow bridge creaked ominously under his weight, shifting slightly. He moved with agonizing care, placing each foot precisely, testing before committing his full weight. Anya watched, her heart in her throat, the memory of the grave suffocating darkness warring with the dizzying drop beneath the fragile bridge. The wind howled through the gorge below, a mournful sound. Her turn. She took a deep, shuddering breath, steeling herself. One step, like gathering herbs. Leave no mark. She stepped onto the bridge. It groaned, softer this time. She focused only on Kaelen's boot prints ahead, on the solid line of his back. The world narrowed to the next step, the next breath. The cold, the fear, the vast emptiness below. She pushed it all away. Step. Test. Step. She was halfway across when she heard it. A shout from the rim, behind them. Tall bull. He stood outlined against the sky, pointing. His warriors fanned out beside him. They'd seen them. One warrior knocked an arrow to his bowstring. "Anya, move!" Kaelen's shout was raw with urgency. He was already on the far side, turning, his own bow unslung in a heartbeat. Panic surged. Anya broke into a shuffling run, abandoning caution. The snow bridge shuddered violently beneath her. A sharp crack sounded, like lightning splitting stone. A fissure snaked across the snow just ahead of her. She screamed, stumbling. Kaelen loosed an arrow. It wasn't aimed to kill, but to distract, whistling past the bowman's head, forcing him to duck. "Jump!" Kaelen roared, stretching out his hand towards her across the last few feet of the crumbling bridge. Anya launched herself forward, her feet slipping on the fracturing snow. She stretched, fingers straining. Kaelen's hand clamped around her wrist with bruising force just as the snow bridge beneath her feet gave way with a roar, plummeting into the gorge in a cloud of ice crystals. Her legs swung out over nothingness, the wind tearing at her. Kaelen grunted, muscles bunching as he hauled her bodily onto the solid rock of the far rim. They collapsed together, gasping, the remains of the bridge vanishing into churning mists far below. Safe, for the moment. Tall Bull's furious roar echoed across the gorge, impotent. The gap was too wide, the crossing destroyed. His warriors milled at the edge, searching for another way down. Kaelen pushed himself up, breathing hard, his eyes scanning the opposite rim, then the broken landscape behind them. The immediate threat was blocked, but they were far from safe. Tall Bull would find a way around, given time. And time was against them. The exertion, the cold, the lack of food were taking their toll. Anya lay on the cold stone, trembling, staring up at the vast, indifferent sky, the phantom sensation of falling still gripping her. Kaelen knelt beside her. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into the pouch at his belt. He pulled out the small bone bird, its pale form stark against his weathered palm. He looked at it for a long moment, then at Anya, her face pale, her eyes wide with residual terror. Slowly, deliberately, he pressed the carving into her hand, folding her cold fingers around it. His touch lingered for a heartbeat. "Ilara's wish," he said, his voice rough but softer than she'd ever heard it. "To fly safe. Hold it until we find solid ground." It wasn't just a carving. It was trust. It was his deepest wound, his most fragile hope, entrusted to her. Anya closed her fingers around the smooth bone, feeling its contours, its weight. It was warm from his touch. She met his gaze, the shared peril, the desperate flight, the near death on the bridge. It forged a connection deeper than words. She nodded, unable to speak, clutching the tiny bird. Kaelen stood, offering his hand again, not to pull her up, but in silent solidarity. She took it, pulling herself to her feet. He scanned the terrain ahead, a broken plateau leading towards distant pine-covered foothills. Sanctuary, perhaps, or more wilderness. He pointed. That way, less exposed. Find water, shelter. They moved, slower now, conserving energy, sticking to the cover of scattered rock formations. Anya kept glancing back across the gorge. Tall Bull and his men were gone, vanished from the rim. They were regrouping, finding a way. The chase wasn't over. It had merely entered a new, more treacherous phase. The bone bird was a small, hard lump in her fist, a symbol of trust bought with shared terror. As they descended a rocky slope toward the promise of the pines, Anya's gaze swept the vast, snow-covered expanse stretching to the eastern horizon. Her breath hitched. She stopped dead, pulling Kaelen to a halt beside her. "What?" he asked, instantly alert, hand go to his knife. She didn't answer. She just pointed, her hand trembling. Far away, on the very edge of the world where the white land met the gray sky, a thin, dark line snaked upwards. Not storm clouds. Smoke, multiple thin columns, rising lazily into the cold air. Her vision, the lodges burning, the screams. It wasn't madness. It was prophecy, and it was riding towards him on the wind. Kaelen followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. He saw it too. The grim set of his jaw deepened. Settlers, he breathed, the word heavy with old hatred and new dread. Moving west, many fires. The threat behind them was relentless. The threat ahead was vast and unknown, carrying the echo of Kaelen's deepest pain and the horrifying confirmation of Anya's curse. They stood frozen on the slope, caught between the vengeful past and a future written in smoke and fire. The wilderness offered no refuge, only converging paths of peril. The bone bird in Anya's hand felt suddenly like the weight of the world. The smoke stained the eastern horizon like a bleeding wound on the pale dawn sky. Thin, dark tendrils coiled upwards, too many for a hunting party, too deliberate for wildfire. Anya's vision, the roaring flames, the screams, solidified into terrifying reality. She clutched the bone bird, its smooth contours digging into her palm, a tiny anchor against a vast dread rising with the smoke. Kaelen stood frozen beside her on the rocky slope, his gaze fixed on the distant stain. The lines around his eyes deepened, etching a map of old pain and fresh apprehension. The wilderness, already a gauntlet of ice and pursuit, now held a second, more insidious hunter. Settlers, Kaelen repeated, the word a low growl that blended with the wind whipping across the plateau. His hand tightened on his bow, moving fast. Many wagons. He turned, his eyes scanning the broken landscape behind them. The gorge they'd barely escaped, the high ground where Tall Bull will be seeking a way around. No shelter here. They'll see us for miles. He pointed northwest, toward a rumpled expanse of pine-covered foothills rising against the snow-capped peaks. Deep woods valley, sheltered, water, a place. I know. He didn't elaborate, but the grim certainty in his voice was their only compass. They moved, abandoning the exposed plateau for the deceptive cover of scattered boulders and stunted pines leading towards the foothills. The urgency was a physical force, a counterpoint to their bone-deep exhaustion. Every shadow among the rocks could be Tall Bull's scout. Every rustle of wind-stripped branches echoed the imagined creak of settler wagons. Anya's feet, though still aching, moved with a desperate rhythm fueled by the twin terrors snapping at their heels. The bone bird was a constant pressure in her fist, a reminder of the fragile trust binding her to the silent hunter forging the path ahead. Kaelen led them down a steep, screlating gully choked with snowdrifts, his movements economical, his senses constantly probing the terrain. He paused at the bottom, crouching behind a massive, ice-veined boulder, gesturing for Anya to wait. Ahead, a frozen creek wound through a narrow defile, its banks thick with dense stands of leafless alder and willow. He scanned the opposite bank, then the snowy ground near the ice. His breath plumed white in the frigid air. Tracks, he murmured, pointing to faint, recent indentations partially filled by wind-blown snow. 2 horses, unshod, circling back towards the high ground. Tall bull scouts. They were searching the perimeter, trying to cut them off before they reached the deeper woods. Anya's heart hammered. She peered past the boulder, her eyes tracing the scout's path. Then she saw it, a subtle disturbance in the snow near the base of a lightning-struck ponderosa pine on the far bank, a shallow depression, almost hidden by overhanging branches. "There," she whispered, pointing. "A pit? Or a trap?" Kaelen's eyes narrowed, following her finger. He nodded slowly, a flicker of something akin to respect in his gaze. Sharp eyes. Could be a snare line, or a deadfall. He altered their course immediately, leading them further upstream, away from the visible tracks and the suspicious depression, keeping low and using the creek's eroded bank as cover. Anya's warning had bought them precious moments, a sliver of agency in their flight. She felt a fragile surge of strength, a defiance against the shame that had buried her. Hours bled into the relentless gray of the winter afternoon. They climbed higher into the foothills, the pines growing taller, their dense canopy offering deeper gloom and relative shelter from the biting wind. The air grew colder, sharper, smelling of pine resin and deep, undisturbed snow. Kaelen pushed them hard, stopping only for brief moments to listen, to scan the slopes below. The settler smoke remained a constant, ominous smear on the eastern horizon. Anya's vision played behind her eyes. Not just fire, but the grim faces of men in rough-spun clothes, the glint of metal, the sound of axes biting into ancient trees. Prophecy was a crushing weight. As dusk began to stain the western sky violet and indigo, Kaelen led them off the main game trail they'd been following, plunging into a thicket of young spruce, so dense Anya had to crawl. They emerged into a hidden valley, cradled like a secret in the mountain's palm. It was smaller than Anya expected, sheltered by steep, forested slopes. A steaming thermal spring fed a small, unfrozen pool at its heart, mist curling lazily into the cold air, and a grove of ancient, wide-branched cottonwoods stood sentinel, their silver bark glowing faintly in the fading light. The ground near the spring was relatively snow-free, covered in dormant grass and dried ferns. It felt ancient, secluded, a pocket of fragile peace. "Here," Kaelen said, his voice rough with fatigue, but holding a note of finality. "Deep woods. The earth breathes warmth here. We rest. Watch." He moved immediately, not towards the inviting warmth of the spring, but to the valley's narrow entrance, a steep-sided gap choked with boulders. He began constructing a simple but effective alarm. Carefully balanced stones that would clatter down if disturbed, strands of dried vines stretched taut and low across likely paths. Anya watched, learning. Survival wasn't just strength. It was silence, anticipation, reading the land's whispers. As darkness settled fully, Kaelen risked a small, carefully shielded fire deep within the cottonwood grove, its light hidden by the massive trunks. He heated water in his tin kettle, adding dried berries and shreds of venison from his dwindling supply. The simple broth was ambrosia. Anya huddled near the flames, Kaelen's mountain lion cloak wrapped tight, the bone bird still held securely. The warmth seeped into her, easing the deep ache of cold and fear. Across the fire, Kaelen sat sharpening his skinning knife with a smooth river stone, the rhythmic scrape, a strangely comforting sound in the vast silence. The valley felt like a fragile dream, a stolen moment suspended between the threats pursuing them. Suddenly, the night shattered, not by clattering stones, but by a guttural shout echoing down from the valley rim. "Girl, Hunter, we know you are there. The spirits see you hiding. Tall Bull's voice, amplified by the rock walls, filled the small valley with chilling authority. Torchlight flickered high on the eastern slope, illuminating 3 figures. Tall Bull and 2 warriors, their faces set in grim determination. They hadn't triggered the alarms. They'd found a higher vantage point. You bring the white man's shadow upon us. Tall Bull roared, pointing accusingly toward the eastern horizon, invisible now but marked by the remembered smoke. Your curse draws their fire. Kaelen was on his feet instantly, bow knocked, melting into the deeper shadow of a cottonwood. Anya stood too, her heart pounding, but not with the old terror. A fierce clarity washed over her. The shame, the burial, the flight. It crystallized into a desperate resolve. She stepped forward, away from the fire's concealment, into the open space near the steaming pool. She raised her voice, clear and strong, cutting through the cold air. Tall Bull, the curse is not mine. It rides on the wind from the east. I saw it. Fire, death, they come not for me, but for all our lodges. She poured the vision into her words. The choking smoke, the unnatural thunder of guns, the screams of children, the sacred trees falling. She spoke not as a condemned girl, but as a voice of warning, her Arapaho words resonating with the ancient fear of displacement and destruction. My refusal was not shame. It was a shield offered. To wed Stone Bear was to tie our band to a path leading straight into the white man's fire. I saw his arrogance, his disregard for the spirits of the land. He would have drawn their wrath upon us all. Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with the raw intensity of truth finally spoken aloud. Silence followed her words, thick and heavy, broken only by the hiss of the thermal spring and the crackle of their small fire. The torchlight on the ridge wavered. Tall Bull stood immobile, his face unreadable at this distance. The warriors beside him shifted uneasily. The distant settler threat, made real by the smoke and Anya's impassioned prophecy, hung heavy in the cold air. Then a low murmur passed between the warriors. Tall Bull raised his hand, not in threat, but in a gesture demanding silence. He stared down into the valley, his gaze fixed on Anya's small, defiant figure illuminated by the torchlight and the faint glow from the spring. He saw no curse girl now. He saw a young woman standing her ground, speaking a truth that resonated with the dread in his own heart. He had seen the smoke. He knew the stories from the south and east. The world was changing, bringing fire and the end of the old ways. Your vision, Tall Bull's voice when it came was lower, stripped of its previous fury, tinged with a grudging, horrified acknowledgement. It brings no comfort, girl, only darkness. He paused, the weight of leadership and tradition pressing down. The elders, they feared disruption, feared the spirit's anger. Another pause, longer this time. The torchlight dipped slightly. This valley, it is old ground, sacred to the spirits of earth and water. We will not violate it with blood tonight. He looked eastward, toward the unseen stain of settlement. Our fight lies elsewhere now, against a different fire. He turned abruptly, gesturing to his warriors. Without another word, the torchlight receded, moving back along the ridge and vanishing into the night. The tension bled from the valley like air from a punctured hide. Anya swayed, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her weak-kneed and trembling. Kaelen emerged from the shadows, his bow lowered, his expression unreadable in the gloom. He walked to where she stood, near the edge of the warm pool. "You spoke strong," he said, his voice gravelly but holding a new depth. They heard the truth in the smoke. Anya whispered, looking up at him. The bone bird still clutched tight. Kaelen nodded toward the east. That truth still comes. We warned Tall Bull. His fight is his own now. He looked around the hidden valley, the steam curling peacefully in the starlight. This place that offers rest, but not forever. The world shrinks. They didn't speak of the future that night. They tended the small fire, ate the last of the venison broth, and huddled close for warmth under the vast, indifferent sweep of stars. As the first faint streaks of dawn painted the eastern sky, not with smoke, but with pale rose and gold, Kaelen stirred. He walked to the edge of the thermal pool, its warm water reflecting the burgeoning light. He took a small, worn pouch from his belt, one Anya hadn't seen before. From it, he drew a pinch of dried, fragrant leaves, sweet grass, mingled with something darker, earthier. He knelt and carefully placed it on a flat stone near the water's edge. With a piece of flint, he sparked a tiny flame onto the offering. Fragrant smoke, thin and pure, curled upwards, carrying a scent that spoke of sun-drenched prairies and deep forests far to the south. He closed his eyes, his lips moving silently in a language Anya didn't understand, a rhythmic murmur that blended with the gentle lap of the warm water, a Cherokee prayer, for Alara, for his lost people, for guidance in a world unraveling. Anya watched, her heart full. She understood the need to speak to the spirits, to honor the past. She stepped forward, gathering a few dried fern fronds and a sprig of resilient sagebrush growing near the spring. She added them to the small smoldering offering on the stone. She didn't chant aloud, but silently in her heart, she offered the Arapaho words of protection, for safe passage, for the strength of roots deep in the earth. Their separate prayers, rising on the same smoke, mingled in the cool dawn air. As the sun crested the valley rim, painting the cottonwoods in gold and the steam in luminous tendrils, Kaelen stood. He turned to Anya. He held out his hand, palm open, not to pull her up, but in a gesture of quiet expectation. Anya understood. She opened her own hand, revealing the small bone bird, warm from her grasp. She placed it gently into his palm. Kaelen looked down at the carving, the tiny folded wings. He ran his thumb over it once, a caress laden with memory. Then, instead of putting it away, he reached out and gently closed Anya's fingers back over it. Ilara's wish, he said, his voice rough with emotion, to fly safe. It found you. Keep it. A reminder that even grounded, hope has wings. Anya closed her hand around the carving, feeling the solid truth of it. She looked at Kaelen, then out across the hidden valley, bathed in the clear, cold light of morning. The immediate threats had receded. Tall Bull turned towards a different battle, the settlers still distant, but the smoke still stained the horizon of the world. They were safer now, in the secret fold of the earth. Two survivors from broken worlds, bound by a grave, a rescue, and a tiny bone bird. Kaelen picked up his bow and slung his quiver. We moved deeper into the hills today, he stated, his gaze scanning the slopes leading further northwest. Find a place less known. Hunt. Wait out the white storm. He didn't speak of permanence. The world offered none, but he spoke of we. Anya nodded. Tucking the bone bird safely into the small beaded pouch she wore beneath her dress, a relic from her mother, she pulled a mountain lion cloak tighter, its familiar weight of comfort. She fell into step beside Kaelen, not behind him, as they left the sanctuary of the steaming spring and the sacred cottonwoods. The path ahead was uncertain, winding through a changing land where old spirits clashed with new fires. But they walked it together, a solitary hunter and the girl who saw the flames, carrying a small, carved hope in the face of the encroaching dawn. The wilderness stretched before them, vast and perilous. But for the first time since the grave, Anya didn't feel alone beneath the endless sky.